And now, a moment that we've been highly anticipating and waiting for. We're very excited that our keynote speaker today is Dr. Reverend Barber. Dr. Reverend Barber is the president and senior lecturer of Repairers of the Breach, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, bishop with the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, visiting professor at Union Theological Seminary, pastor of Greenleaf Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and the author of 4 books. Our Reverend Dr. Barber is one of the 2019 recipients of the North Carolina Award, the state's highest civilian honor. He is a 2018 MacArthur Foundation Genius Award recipient, as well as a 2015 recipient of the Franklin D. Roosevelt Four Freedoms Award and the Puffin Award. Reverend Dr. Barber has had 10 honorary degrees conferred upon him. It is with great excitement and honor that NNSTOY welcomes Reverend Barber to the All for Equity convening.
I worked 41 years in the coal mines. I have black lung, and it's just unfathomable what these poor coal miners have to go through in order to get what they have worked for and deserve.
At one time, poverty was a temporary condition. You were on a down slope for a minute, but you could bounce back up. We can't bounce back up today. It's permanent. We're not going back to the factory and building cars and trucks like we once did.
A job working at McDonald's or the grocery store doesn't pay enough for one person to live.
We work a 40-hour work week, still not enough. Living from paycheck to paycheck. Rent is $600 a month. We got water bill, electricity. I do this for my kids. And it hurts.
I'm 46 years old. I've lived in poverty here in West Virginia every day of my life. And I'm working. I am working poor with a bachelor's degree. I'm doing the best I can with what I have.
We were in the height of mass water shutoffs. This entire neighborhood was shut off all at one time.
I saw all my neighbors get shut off right in front of me. It was kind of terrifying.
I'm 42 years old, and I'm a cashier at McDonald's. I had lost my house. You're welcome to come inside. There's a lot of people that are living in their cars. You never notice until you're in the same situation.
I don't have stuff to give my children. I'm paying all these bills, and they need school clothes and stuff. They be asking me for, I can't give it to them.
Now I'm a Kansas farmer's wife. Kansas farmers are committing suicide. Why? They're usually in debt up to their eyeballs.
I see poverty in my own community. You know, there's a 70% unemployment rate in the reservation right now.
Here in New York City, we're home to millionaires and billionaires, and we have so many people living in the street, and that's just not right.
I've been a homeless veteran twice, lived in a shelter.
I've been living down here since I was 17.
My only chance of going to college was joining the Army. We are demanding that we stop the war on our poor.
700,000 people in this country are on the verge of losing their food stamps.
This budget calls for shrinking the social safety net programs like Medicare.
I just know that everything that's happening to us isn't right.
I'm in stage 5 of kidney disease. I fell behind on my health care, and they canceled my health insurance, and they told me I have to wait until open enrollment. There's only 5 stages of kidney disease, and I'm in the 5th stage. Murder, it's murder. You know, if you ask me, it's murder.
I lost a son to gun violence, and I lost a daughter.
No parent should have, in America, should have to bury their child for a lack of medicated expansion. I'm wailing because my children
my God.
are no more.
My God. My God, Kevin.
Well, I'm wailing, y'all. Wailing. Because my babies ain't no more. babies. How many more children? No more.
I want you to know that when hands that once picked cotton join hands of Latinos, join hands of progressive whites, join faith hands and labor hands and Asian hands and Native American hands and poor hands and wealthy hands with a conscience and gay hands and straight hands and trans hands and Christian hands and Jewish hands and Muslim hands and Hindu hands and Buddhist hands. When we all get together, we are an instrument of redemption. When we join hands, we can revive and make sure that the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and equal protection under the law is never taken away from anybody. So I got a question. Are the rejected ready to revive and declare that this land is your land, this land is my land, this land is our land, and together from the State House to the White House, the rejected are going to demand that this nation never give up on being one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hello to everybody. Hello to this great and powerful organization. To anybody who had anything to do with me being a part of coming today, your presidents, your officers, Brother Williams. You know, I've come from a family of educators. So my mother and father came back to the South in the 60s to help desegregate schools in the South. And so all my life, I've been around educators. I want today to expedite the time and go right to the heart of the matter and talk about why we must teach the nation in order to transform the nation. We must teach the nation in order to transform the nation. I want to bring greetings on behalf of all of the members of the Poor People's Campaign, the National Call for a Moral Revival, the 47 state coordinating committees, hundreds of partners, thousands of moral religious leaders, and my co-chair, the Reverend Dr. Leah Steele Harris. We believe that we must teach the nation in order to transform the nation. Before there can be implementation, there has to be a reimagination. There are over 140 million people who are poor and low wealth in this country, just one emergency away from economic ruin. 8 million more people fell into poverty during COVID, while billionaires made nearly $2 trillion. COVID has really shown us the great fissures of poverty and racism that still exists in this country. And poverty and low wealth are deeply intertwined with the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, denial of health care, ecological devastation, the underfunding of public education, militarism in the war economy, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism. We must teach the nation in order to transform the nation. Every year, even before COVID, 700 people died a day from poverty. 250,000 people a year died from poverty. Children in our schools lost parents, and parents lost children from the effects of poverty. And we know that these problems do not exist because of people's personal immorality, but they exist, as Jeffrey Sachs, a renowned economist, says, because of structural realities and structural sin and the problem of immoral laws and immoral policies and systems that even sometimes good people get caught up in and end up endorsing unwittingly what is going on, which is why we must teach the nation to transform the nation. We must have the resolve to pass moral and just policies and to declare that there is no scarcity of resources. There is no scarcity of ideas on how to transform the realities of systemic racism and poverty and ecological devastation and underfunding public education and denial of health care and the war economy. What we have is a scarcity of moral will. That's why, just like we used to in the old days in education, when you learned your timetables by rote, 1 times 1 is 1, 1 times 2 is 2, 1 times 3 is 3. We must teach this nation by rote. Over and over again, we must teach the nation in order to transform the nation. In that 140 million people who are poor and low wealth, that is 43% of this nation, nearly 50%. And it's over 50% of our children in the richest nation in the history of the world. Might I teach a little bit this morning? That's 52% of our children, 39 million children. That's 45% of women, 74 million women. That's 60% of Black people, 24 million Black people. That's 64% of Latino people, 38 million people. That's 40% of Asian people and Pacific Islanders, 8 million people. That's 59% of Native and Indigenous people. That's 2 million people. And it's 33% of white people, which is 66 million white brothers and sisters, 40 million in raw numbers more than the number of people of color, Black people who are in poverty today and low wealth. There's not a county in this country where you are teaching children where a parent can work a minimum wage job and afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment. Not one county, whether you're in the East or the West, the North or the South. We must teach the nation in order to transform the nation. And like you do every day, we must teach over and over and over again until we transform the moral imagination, which is why I'm not just here today joining you, but I'm here today to ask that you, all of you, NEA, this body, this group, to join us for a mass Poor People's Low-Wage Workers Assembly, June 18, 2022. We need a generationally transformative declaration that these things have gone on far too long and we can't be silent anymore. And we need to understand that the people who are against public education, most times the same forces are against voting rights, same forces are against raising a living wage, same forces are against dealing with climate change. And if they are cynical enough to be together, we must be smart enough and courageous enough to come together. So I'm here also to say, let's join together, regardless of what turns out with the BBB plan, which we are pushing for, or other matters. We must have a generationally transformative declaration that we are not going to settle for what we see now. It does not have to be. It is not God ordained. And we can end poverty and low wealth from the bottom up if we have the resolve to it. And in the area of education, the data tells us the benefits. An investment of $24 billion a year in K through 12 schools and teachers could boost academic performance among poor and struggling children at about the same cost that it would have cost to build a foolish wall at the southern border. There is no real mystery around this. How do you grow a chick into a chicken? How do you grow a pig into a hog? You feed it. It's the same way with education and teachers. If we want to grow, we should feed our educational systems. And by the way, $24 billion a year is one military contract. One military contract to one military contractor could fundamentally transform education in this country. We need to know that universal early learning and child care support would require $100 billion a year. That's substantially less than the $130 billion a year that we could be generated if we merely restored the corporate tax. That is why even with this Build Back Better plan, we have said, and I'm glad to hear that the secretary is on the line, that to the president, put Let's stop just talking about numbers, 3 trillion, 5 trillion, and put a face on this issue. Put a face on it. Put teachers talking about it. Have a press conference with parents and people who need health care and low-wage workers, and let them teach the nation in order to transform the nation. We must teach that for every $1 invested in early childhood education, society would gain $7.30 due to reduced poverty and lower incarceration. We must teach. We must teach that the federal and state shares of providing free public college would cost about $70 billion, but that's less than the revenue that could be generated by just a small tax on Wall Street, and as I said earlier, one military contractor. We must teach that in 2016, school districts that serve predominantly white students received $23 billion more in funding than districts that serve predominantly students of color. That's what we mean by systemic racism. It is not merely a statue up in somewhere or somebody calling you the N-word. It is the continuing systems that despairingly fund and empower certain communities. We know that those students of color in those areas, they get $2,000 less per student in districts that serve mostly students of color. This is not fair. This is not the way we should be operating in America. We must teach the nation in order to transform the nation. We know that the National Bureau of Economic Advisors did a study on the effects of K through 12 education, and they found that the effects of bringing all students up to a basic level achievement on standardized tests, watch this, could grow the economy by $32 trillion over a long-term period. $32 trillion of growth if we just brought all of the children in K through 12 up to a basic level of achievement. We must teach the nation. We know that student debt has now grown to over $1.6 trillion, and the vast majority of these loans are made through and owned to the Department of Education. Only 7.6% through private lenders. And a 2018 report from the Levy Economics Institute found that even student loan balances below the average cause hardship, especially for low-income borrowers. But what we know is that the same report finds that the macroeconomic and social benefits to a one-time cancellation of all student debt would result in, listen at this, real gross domestic product growth of between $861 billion and $1.083 trillion over 10 years. We are losing economically and educationally when we do not do the right thing. We must teach the nation. We also know that in 2014, more than 1/3 of schools supported by the Bureau of Indian Education were in serious despair and disrepair. 68 of the highest risk tribal colleges require $1.3 billion to address leaking roofs and walls and asbestos and mold. These are the brothers and sisters of the first story. These are the brothers and sisters that if we don't get the first story right, we'll never get the rest of the story right. And if we invest it, because investment has fallen in those areas. Investment has fallen from 400 million to just 133 million, and we should not accept that. We know that historically Black colleges and universities have never received the funding that they ought to. We know that HBCUs constitute just 3% of the nation's institutions, but graduate 20% of Black students from college and many of our teachers. And more than 50% of Black professionals and public school teachers come from HBCUs. So there's no way we're serious about addressing racism and growth in minority communities if we are not funding HBCUs properly. And we know even with underfunding, HBCUs yield nearly $15 billion in annual economic impact to our nation. We must teach the nation in order to transform the nation. And so those are the factual realities. What are then the solution? Well, one proposal that in the Poor People's Campaign we are pushing is would allocate an additional $1 trillion, a 10-year increase for educational programs such as Head Start and early education and youth summer jobs and Pell Grants and Social Security block grants, those things. $1 trillion. You say, well, that's a lot of money. Well, we're over a 10-year period, $1 trillion. But we gave the airline industry $1 trillion in 1 month just last year during COVID. We have the resources. The issue is where those issues get placed. And we know if we were to do that, that investment in schools and teachers would be powerful. Right now, there's some talking about cutting the Build Back Better plan. Well, what are you going to cut? It's already $7 trillion lower than the Economic Policy Institute says it needs to be to get people back to even. It's a step in the right direction, but it's not the end of the journey. What are you going to cut? Money for children, money for child care, money for health care, money to deal with climate reality. The fact is, if you cut the Build Back Better plan from what has been proposed now, or compromised, 3.5 to 1.5, you also will cut out 2 million jobs. We must teach the nation in order to transform the nation. We $100 billion for public schools and a badly needed physical and digital improvement. That's what the Poor People's Campaign is pushing along with others. We also know that if we secure quality, equitable, and diverse public education, and we end resegregation of schools, we should not tolerate the resegregation of schools, because the resegregation of schools means the resegregations of bodies and books and curriculums and budgets and teachers. We know that we need high quality, equitable, diverse public education as a legal right. At some point, we're going to have to decide, even in our Constitution, that public education must be a constitutional right. A constitutional right. We know what to do. We have the resources. We can invest in technology and infrastructure. We can make sure that we have arts and music and cultural programs as well. We can increase and secure resources for schools and the development of teachers. We can support teacher training rather than always putting down teachers. There's no way in the world we should be paying coaches more than we pay teachers who handle all day and every day the most valuable part of our reality, which is our children. Our children. We must teach the nation in order to transform the nation. And so my time is short today, and I could go more, but the point I really want to make is that we must push this as a moral and values issue, because the truth is, anyone who does not fight for their children is not worthy of having them. One of the ancient proverbs of Africa says, when you want to know how a nation is doing, ask, how are the children? And how are those who teach the children? And so now we have the ideas and we have the money. Don't you let anybody fool you. What we have not had is the all-out fight, the fight around morals and values, the fight that says, we're going to take on all of the forces that challenge. We're not going to just fight. Educators can't just fight for public education and not be in the fight for living wages and the fight for voting rights, because it's all the same fight. It's all the same fight. Too long we have been siloed. Now we must have our silos, but we must bring our silos together. And we must declare in this moment, we must teach the nation that not to do the things we need to do to end poverty and end the underfunding of public education and end the way in which we mistreat our teachers is constitutionally inconsistent. It is morally indefensible. It is economically insane, and it is politically incompetent. They tell me that in the ancient world, as I close, that whenever a warring factor, a conquering group wanted to destroy a nation, once they broke through the borders of that nation, the first thing they destroyed were the libraries and the schools. the libraries and the schools. And then they changed the language to make the language of the oppressor the official language of the land they were oppressing. Well, we cannot allow this battle for the soul of our democracy to watch our public schools, our public teachers, our public community colleges and institutions be undermined. We must fight for them. So we must teach the nation in order to transform the nation. And we must never take no for an answer. This nation can be taught. People taught it before. The abolitionists taught it that slavery was wrong. The women's suffrage taught it that denying women the right to vote was wrong. The civil rights movement taught it that Jim Crow was wrong. The peace warriors taught it that war in Vietnam was wrong. And it's our time to teach this nation again in order to transform the nation. And we will never take no for an answer when it comes to our children and it comes to our teachers. God bless you. Let us be about the business of teaching the nation in order to transform the nation. And I pray that you will join us and we will put a massive gathering together on June 18, 2020 with all of us together. And the voices that will speak from the mic will be teachers like you and parents and students, those impacted. We're going to put a face on the problem and then use the face and the voice to create the moral consciousness to transform the problem. God bless you. Thank you so much for having me.
Reverend Barber, I just want to thank you so much for your message. And I just keep reflecting on the teach the nation to transform the nation. And then I think it stands out that when you're talking about equity and really moving the needle on equity, how much education was in your message and the importance that if we don't get to equity without really making sure a high quality education is there for every single child. And so in your video, you talked about joining hands of everyone. I want you to know that teacher leaders across this nation are with you and joining for this hands. Thank you for such an emphasis on education. And I also hear in your message that this is a time for teacher leaders and teachers across the country to lean in and really focus on equity. This is not a time to shy away. This is not a time to dial back. This is a time to lean in, and because there's a lot at stake.
Thank you. Well, you know, the truth of the matter is, Howard Thurman said, sometimes you measure your power by the level of the attack against you. And if we are in a time where people are attacking the White House and the Capitol and insurrection and attacking voting rights, and in these state legislatures trying to cut back public education and put more money in private schools and attack living wages, that is not a sign of our weakness. It's a sign of our strength. The question is, do we realize it? And do we realize it from the standpoint to say, yes, teachers have to have a special groups like this one and special conventions and whatnot, but we ought to at least be able every so often to come together and show that these interlocking injustices must be challenged by an interconnected mass moral movement. We have to do it. We cannot see these issues anymore as separate. You know, that's one of the tricks in Washington, D.C. They try to separate, like now they're trying to pass the infrastructure without passing the investment in communities, without passing voting rights. And one of the things dear Sister Jayapal is saying is no, you don't get to do one without the other. And there's a sense in which, because I'm fighting with poor and low wage people for equity in, say, jobs, that fight is also a fight for more investment in teachers and public education. They are not separate, they are intertwined. And I really hope we can have a generationally transformative gathering, not as a day next year, but as a declaration that we know these inequities do not have to exist. They can be ended in our lifetime. We have the resources, we have the ideas, we have to just push the moral and political consciousness of the nation.
Reverend Barber, thank you so much for being such a great friend to the National Network of State Teachers of the Year and to teacher leaders and teachers across this country. And we join you in this work, and thank you so much for being with us today.
My father is smiling from heaven. He was a great teacher. And so you all are the best of the best. Let's take the best of the best, because, you know, if you all are in the streets too, it'll bring other people, because they're not used to the teachers being in the street. And when the teachers and the preachers move in the street, people say something must really be up. Something must really be serious. That's what happened in the civil rights movement. When teachers and students got involved, it was a fundamental shift. And we've got to have that day. I look forward to organizing with you, look forward to standing with you, and we will move forward together and never take one step back. God bless you.
Thank you.